Good afternoon, everyone. May I ask you to take your seats, please? We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm the Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council, and I'm really delighted to welcome you for a fireside chat without the fireplace, but a conversation with Dr. Krzysztof Szczerski. Welcome back to the Atlantic Council. We're delighted to host the Polish State Secretary and Chief of the Cabinet of the President of Poland. Today's program, this conversation, is about 100 years together in charting the course ahead, about the U.S. relationship with Poland over 100 years of its regained independence. I want to encourage all of you that are here and those that are following online to use our hashtag that we've been using for the year, hashtag 100 years together, and join in this conversation. We are celebrating that centennial, but we're also considering the consequences of the U.S.-Polish relationship today within NATO as member of the European Union to ensure Poland is permanently secure, sovereign, and free. I think all of you very much well know the history of Poland, a history where we've seen Poland removed from the maps of Europe, but never from the hearts and minds of us or the Polish people. We understand Polish history, fascism's defeat in World War II, with Polish fighters at the forefront of that struggle, being followed by the unfortunate repression of communism and Soviet repression. It's the vision of a Europe whole and free that began to emerge in Poland first in 1989, and what an extraordinary journey it's been as Poland became a NATO ally and EU member. It really is quite remarkable. And that sets the scene for what our job is in our conversation today. Those gains, the gains we enjoyed for 25 years after the end of the Cold War, are not self-executing. In fact, today we're witnessing an effort to roll back those post-war gains by a Russia that's looking to disrupt our interests, and even to some degree by a China with a new game in town looking to displace, in some cases, those interests. We've just come from a private meeting, a discussion with Dr. Szczerski with the Atlantic Council Task Force that's been working on American force posture, U.S. force posture in Europe. And I think that it's clear to many of our folks that have been working on this who are in this room today that it is time to begin planning for a sustained permanent capability that we're going to need to deal with NATO's deterrence in the East. This effort that we'll be hearing about in the coming days has been chaired by a former SACEUR and Atlantic Council board member, Phil Breedlove, former NATO Deputy Secretary General Sandy Vershbow, who is with us today as a distinguished fellow here, and really are driving forces behind it, Hans Benendijk and Ian Brzezinski, key fellows on our team, as well as Lauren Speranza. There's a historic window of opportunity that's open right now to consider how we get our security posture right in the East and Poland and the Baltic states. And it's also part of our broader commitment to the Atlantic Council and our commitment to Poland and to our presence in Poland. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Szczerski to the stage after he joined us recently in the fall in Poland at one of our CEO summits there. We've been very focused on investment issues in Central and Eastern Europe, on the 3 Cs initiative and how to promote cross-border connections, on standing up Atlanticist fellowships that bring Central Europeans into our home team here in Washington, and we'll be returning to Warsaw in January for a major cybersecurity conference focused on securing the 4th Industrial Revolution. So today is a conversation I'm going to invite to the stage in just a moment Dr. Krzysztof Szczerski, who's not only a lead advisor to President Duda, he's been a strong advocate and ally of the United States. One of Poland's leading strategists is about its position in Europe, its position in the transatlantic relationship, its position in the world. He's coming to the stage after a series of meetings here in Washington, including with National Security Advisor Bolton. And he's going to be joined by a conversation in which is, I think, America's leading expert on Poland, our own distinguished fellow, my own mentor, former boss, Ambassador Dan Fried, who began his career at a historic moment serving as Polish desk officer, only to become U.S. ambassador to Poland, a historic moment. He's an architect of the strategy, American grand strategy towards Europe, having served at the highest levels of the White House and as Assistant Secretary of State on Europe, as sanctions coordinator, and is now driving our program here. So please join me and welcome Dr. Krzysztof, Ambassador Fried, to the stage for this conversation. Thank you.
Dr. Szczerski asked that he not be forced to make another speech, so I will spare him that. By way of introduction, I should say that we met 20 years ago in the administration of Prime Minister Jerzy Buzek, one of Poland's strongest post-1989 prime ministers, when he was young and I was younger. That was 20 years ago. 100 years ago, Poland was newly free and just beginning what would turn out to be its successful wars of independence, including with the Russians. One of the things I learned in reflecting on American foreign policy over the last 100 years is that we have had a debate in my country over whether we regarded Europe as truly indivisible, with Poland an indivisible, integral part of Europe, or whether Poland, and by implication all the other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, had an asterisk next to them with a footnote, handled with care, property of Russia. Now, we never put it in exactly those terms, although some Americans did put it in those terms, starting in World War II. One of the lessons of American diplomacy over the last 80 years is when we put that asterisk on Poland or the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, we usually get really lousy results. But since 1989, successive American administrations up to, and it seems including this one, have sought to remove that asterisk, and the results have been spectacularly good. I believe for Poland, but I am convinced for my country, for the United States, and for the West in general. I mention this because one of the things we're discussing, and one of the things that the Polish government is negotiating with America right now, is the issue of how NATO and the United States can best fulfill its Article 5 commitments to Poland in a time when Russia is in a nasty mood and acting on its nasty mood by attacking Ukraine 10 years after attacking Georgia. Those are complicated issues, and as Damon mentioned, we have a report coming out tomorrow with the Atlantic Council's recommendations. But the underpinnings of this report and of American policy is that we must erase from our minds any residual line, including the one drawn by Mr. Stalin and Mr. Hitler, and then imposed a few years later unilaterally by Mr. Stalin. And I'm putting in those stark terms deliberately because policy is actually about real stark stuff, and there is nothing more stark than the Soviet army arriving in your city and doing what the Soviet army usually does. I wish we didn't have to have this kind of discussion, but we do. And a final point is that, how can I put this delicately about American politics? It's not always easy dealing with the current American administration. It is a special challenge. I see some European colleagues. I won't put you on the spot by asking you to say whether you agree with that. I think the Polish government has done a good job dealing with this issue of Article 5 commitments to Poland and American basing. And yeah, that even includes President Duda's use of the word Fort Trump. I know it was controversial in Poland and elsewhere, but look, I mean, the guy's trying to deal with the Trump administration as best he can. And it's not bad. And more seriously, I've been witness over the past 30 years to a number of Polish pushes of America to do the right thing. And we almost always react the same way. First, we don't want to hear about it. Why are those Poles pushing so hard? And the second reaction is, ooh, they have a point. And the third reaction is, what are we going to do about it? So the Poles have managed to trigger this kind of an internal American debate and a NATO debate, and now we've reached the stage of, well, what are we going to do about it? So that's actually a success of Polish foreign policy in general, and President Duda in particular, and this is a case since domestic politics in Poland is sort of like the US. There are camps and sharp divisions. This is an issue around which there is, in my experience, at least a consensus in Poland. This is not a divisive issue. There's a lot to talk about, but I wanted to, since Damon had said every single thing I wanted to say and had prepared, I had to sort of make it up based on experience, so my apologies. Now this is, the format here is supposed to be a discussion, and then we will open it up to questions. I wanted to ask, first of all, this is the tough question, I'm warning you.
Well.
What's it like dealing with the Trump administration? What can you say? But the larger question is, what is it like dealing with Europe and the United States at a time when all of our politics is stressed? And I have sort of a follow-up thought about that, but I wanted to open up and get your thoughts about Poland and the state of the state of the transatlantic relationship, and dealing, I'm not putting on the spot about the Trump administration per se, but sort of dealing in this context.
Right. First, I should say thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to have this conversation. That's always a privilege to meet such a distinguished diplomat and try to somehow come up to the terms with the diplomatic answers to the tough questions. I can tell you the President Duda has already concluded 80 foreign visits in 3 years. And I can assure you there are always challenges to deal with any administration we are discussing with during this all 80 visits. Every country is different, and the most important thing is to understand the reasons. The one you talked to is pointing the argument on which that, and I think that's what is important nowadays in dealing with the the Polish-American relations is to find out and to find the common ground in a philosophy of America first and Poland first. Because it's, for us it's obvious that every government, like also my government in Poland, my president, his primary duty is to find the best way to realize the Polish interest. And when you are frank with defining your interest, and you're talking to someone who is frank in defining it, the interest coming from the other capital, there's a ground to find the common position. And I think this is important, just to be open and frank in the way you express your expectations. And I think this is the window of opportunity we see now, and in a way that we are kind of making the Polish-U.S. relations. That's coming to the topic of our the main theme of our discussion, 100 years. I think we are now on a stage, at the stage in our relations, when you can discuss the concrete issues. That's what President Duda asked me when we started the whole job in his administration. That he needs and he wants to fulfill the concrete foreign policy, not just a declaration, but to build up the instruments of a partnership. And if you think of the way the Polish-U.S. relations are now built on, you can name these concrete instruments. The Three Seas Initiative as a regional cooperation between the group of the countries between the Black Sea, Adriatic, and the Baltic. With the U.S. interest in investing in the infrastructure. Of course, the U.S. military presence in Poland and this breakthrough decision of the NATO summit in 2016. The LNG terminal and the long-term contract of the gas supply to the Polish system. And then you can name it. The U.S. investment also in our energy sector and in different other sectors. So when I was witnessing the President Duda and President Trump sitting at the table in Washington in White House in September, I was proud to hear and to listen and to witness the discussion between the President of the United States and the President of Poland, having the list of the concrete issues just to tick out during the conversation, not just exchanging the opinions, but really ticking out what is the real interest and the instruments you can use to realize them. And I think this is important because for many years in this 100 years of the Polish-U.S. relations, there was this nightmares. We got several nightmares in our foreign policy, but one of them was what was defined in Polish textbooks on foreign policy was defined as an exotic alliance. An exotic alliance was defined as the alliance between the two states when the existence of one of them is not of the basic interest of the basic condition of existing the other one.
Right.
So that means you are allies, but you are not mutually guaranteeing your existence. And the Polish-U.S. relations in the past was always somehow defined as exotic alliance. That of course the existence of Poland is not the precondition of existence of the United States. So of course we are allied, but we were starting from a different status. And what we are trying to do now is somehow make it the concrete and real alliance between Poland and the U.S. because to engage U.S. interest more and more into the existence of Poland and Polish interest. And I think it is done. It's not just a question of the last couple of years, but we are building up in this last period to make it the concrete alliance. And I think this is the crucial thing in the Polish-U.S. relations nowadays. In the same time, you always have to somehow view it in the future and always be ambitious. Because I think when you discuss this 100 years of Polish-U.S. relations, it seems like it's a long historical period. But then you realize that myself, I'm not too old, but I lived over half of it. You lived more than even half of this 100 years. So it's about our lives. It's not about the kind of abstract period of time. And you can assume these 100 years by your own private experience. And of course, this is somehow natural, but it can also be the sort of obstacle in seeing it objectively. Because you know that we are living in the best moment of these 100 years, if you think of what was in the past. The communism, the two world wars, all these things that happened in the past. So you tend to think this is perfect, and so let's not only make it worse, but for the people that now are in the teenage period. I mean, they are not happy of our own good past. They want to have a good future. And so we now our responsibility is to prepare the better future for them, even if we are happy of what happened and how our own lives went through and what we achieved during these 100 years of our share of these 100 years.
The younger generation in Poland and the United States is growing up without personal memories of the Cold War. And the younger generation of Poles has to go to a museum or listen to their parents, which some do, some don't, to understand what happened, which is a measure of our success, but it is something we have to consider. But clearly, I've failed in an attempt to give you a hard question, so I'm going to try again.
Okay.
But it's based on something you said. The Trump administration talks about sovereignty and America first. President Duda, I've heard, said, of course, I think of Poland first. And your government talks about sovereignty as well. When Poland is thinking about its foreign policy, how do you reconcile the fact that sovereignty is of particular importance to Poland generally, but specifically the current government, given the fact that your security depends on international solidarity through NATO, and your prosperity is bound up with the European Union? I mean, that's not a tension just with Poland. We're seeing this all through Europe. The tensions between a national-focused sovereignty, some say nationalism, and the fact that our common prosperity and the West is a transnational thing, and its values are transnational, and our institutions are transnational, but your government and my government are both focused on sovereignty. How does Poland square that tension?
All right, thank you very much for keeping me
attentive
to your question. I would say, first of all, let's say it openly, both membership I mean, to get into the NATO and to get into the European Union was a sovereign decision of Polish nation.
Right.
So this is expression of our sovereignty, because that's how we decided, and it's our will to stay in the NATO and in the European Union. So there's no contradiction in that. Secondly, what is important for Poland, for Polish foreign policy, that Poland benefits from the unity of West, and Poland loses when the unity of the West is harmed, or when the West is divided, because division of Europe always in the past has always been done in expense of countries like Poland.
Yep.
So we know that we have to keep on the unity of what we call the West. Thirdly, the unity we define as the community, and this is the one of the words that been neglected in the current political debate. I think there's too many people. I mean, we keep on listening and to the argument about the multilateralism. But the multilateralism can be organized on a different method and mode. And we believe in multilateralism built on the community method, which means the loyal cooperation of the allied states, not the hierarchical multilateralism, not the concerto of the powers, because that's also the kind of method of building up multilateralism. There's a different status of the different countries, and there are mighty powers that got enabled, been self-proclaimed position to define the role of the others. Now we believe in the multilateralism and in the NATO and in the European Union built over the community sense, the sense of community, which means the loyal cooperation of the equal states and free nations, and if so, when we somehow arguing with what's going on in the presence reality of the European Union, is that we are arguing that there's a lack of community sense in how this European Union is now operating, in the sense that there is much more. I mean, there is a kind of gaps in the loyalty and the cooperation in Europe and in the transatlantic bond. So we are quite concerned about also the current stage or current situation in the transatlantic bond. And the fourth thing, it's important, talking about the sovereignty. Also in the European debates, I think there's much more all about the internal sovereignty of the peoples, rather than the question of classical sovereignty of states. I mean, the countries, the member states, because the whole debate in Europe is ignited by the question of people being somehow turned out of the impact on the decision-making process. So they are asking for the internal sovereignty of the peoples within the states, within the democracies. I think this is I don't know if it's clear the argument, but I think this is the major problem of the European Union member states. That's kind of the result of the roots of the Brexit. That people cry out for the internal sovereignty of the people within the political system, and that's and the respect to the sovereignty of the people within the political system.
If by that you mean that the EU would be strengthened by bolstering the democratic political legitimacy of European institutions, I happen to agree. And can I ask you to go to London to talk to them about the legitimacy of sovereign decisions to join the European Union? I mean, maybe you don't want to, but I think that's a useful message.
No, it's what we really, what I think we really need in the European Union is this double loop of democracy. First, we have to have a respect for the democracies within the nation states, because this is the democracy at hand. You understand your own national democracy. If it's even if it's sharp and divided, if it's kind of we can assess the quality of the debate, whatever. But this is something you understand, because this is something you're raised up into your own national democracy within your national political system. So we have to respect the democratic choices of the national democracies. And then there should be democracy between the democracies. That means equality and respect, cooperation between the democratic states within the European Union in a way that as much as we advocate democracy within the member states, we have to advocate democracy between the member states. And that gives the democratic legitimacy to the European institutions. I think this is still somehow at stake nowadays in Europe, to have this, to respect this double loop of democracy in Europe.
And to that double loop, I would be tempted to add the legacy of common values that have been part of the West since the Enlightenment or the Middle Ages, the notion that sovereignty is qualified by those higher values, which are now democratic values. This is in Europe and the United States is dealing with a set of issues that is causing us to look inward at a time when those outside of our community are both increasingly authoritarian and increasingly aggressive. So here's a Russia question. Mm-hmm. I've often argued that you can divide American Russia experts, or maybe Western Russia experts, into two categories. You could divide them into lots of categories, but here are the two. Those who think that the Russians are incapable of being anything other than their worst selves, that kind of the current Russia we have today, which is aggressive and authoritarian and murders dissidents and people it wants abroad and invades its neighbors, that is the realistically speaking, that's the only Russia we're likely to get. Based on Russian history, that's one group. And the other group says, no, Russia can be better than its worst history, that it is not doomed to relive its low moments, that Russia has been better in the past, they've reached for something better and they've failed. Now, asking a poll about the Russians, all right, so that's fraught, but since I promised you hard questions, that's another one. You're there and Russia counts. no matter what else Poles think about, they have to think about Russia, especially in government, but generally speaking. If you accept those two schools of thought about Russia, where do you line up? And if there is a better Russia that is possible, how do we get to that better Russia?
First, let me say that I envy you for being in the position of expert and use these bold definitions of the Russian policy of today. I'm being an official representative of my state. I cannot really define it that openly, but
fair enough.
I get this.
You don't have to.
I just grant this grant to you, and dealing with. I believe that the only genuine policy towards Russia should always be somehow built on a solid basis that the only instrument we as the international community has to regulate the peaceful relations between the actors, between the states, is the international law. We invented the international law since Grotius and the others, somehow to regulate the civilized relations between the states. So if the international law is violated, we have to answer to that. We cannot really go into terms to the situation of business as usual when the international law is violated. And so it's not about the assessing the philosophy of the other state. It's not about the kind of moral dimension. It's about the way you have to get your feet on a solid ground, and the solid ground is international law. And surely what we're witnessing is the pure violation of international law in the region of where my country is placed. So so we're not asking for the international community to act in that situation because we are Russophobic or whatever. It's just because we have to have some kind of the solid ground we are conducting our policy, and the solid ground, as I said, is the situation when the international law, in every sense, is violated in our region. You have to understand the situation of the country like Poland. We are the border country. We are the last country of the European Union and the last country of the NATO towards east. So we are just on the very edge of the geopolitical division line. And even more than this, the Polish-Ukrainian border is the last safe border to the east, because the next one is already burning, because it's the war border between the occupied Donbass and Lugansk, occupied Crimea to the south, Transnistria, which is a frozen conflict, occupied parts of the Georgia. I mean, everywhere further east, because of the Russian actions, is not the internationally recognized borders. The only internationally recognized borders, last internationally recognized border in the east is Polish-Ukrainian border. So, and we are really exposed to the security threats because of that. We are really like being the first to be exposed to this situation, and you have to also know. So again, this is not about being especially itchy about the Russia. It's just because this is the reality where my country is facing. This is the environment we are somehow living in, and of course, as the neighbors, we would like to have this better Russia, because of course now we are paying the price for being exposed to the external threats. But as I said, it can only it should only be done in a way that respects the internationally recognized norms and regulations. Otherwise, now, if you make the exceptions to the Russia, then you losing the solid ground. And the problem with the Russian policy, you know it from also from the history of the international relations, is that it is very difficult to conduct the policy to the country which regard the favor as a weakness. And this is the basic problem, because you cannot exchange the favors with the country which defines your favor as your weakness. So this is the Russia I'm dreaming of. Is the Russia that understands the favors as a goodwill, not as of your weakness.
Fair enough. We have about 15 minutes, and I understand that there's somewhere a microphone available. So I wanted to open up the floor to questions. I've got a couple more, but I didn't want to monopolize things. So there we are. And please identify yourself.
Good afternoon, Dr. Szczerski. My name is Walter Jurasek. I'm Polish-American Congress as well. And I am glad that you make Poland first than other, because European Union was not the purpose purpose of European Union was strictly economics and commerce, nothing more. They push it something else. But don't you think if Poland is strong enough that there has a very important issue regarding between West and Soviet Union and Russia, because Poland can be the bridge between West and Russia, because Putin understands much better West than West understands Putin. And Poland is a great role has it in it. So my question, can Poland look at it, no matter how to make better relation with Russia, so they can tell it to the West, we can be in peace and work together?
Well, it's as I said, it just depends how we define the better relations. I define the better relations based on respecting the international law. Yes, and because this how, as you said, can we have a better relation with Russia? Of course we can, if both countries will respect the international law and commitments signed and then of course naturally, it's Poland is by as you said, by the geographic placement is this natural kind of connection between the East and the West. We know it from our history that sometimes is the kind of destiny rather than the opportunity, but of course it is. But as I said, if it's it can only be done not in the special conditions, but in the normal conditions. I'm just everything I expect is just normal.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sir. Boris Ruger, Deputy Ambassador of Germany here in Washington, D.C. Best regards from Thomas Bagger, by the way, with whom I was mailing, your counterpart with President Steinmeier. We've had a series of events over the past weeks and months highlighting Polish-German relations, including in Warsaw and Berlin. I believe the Polish Foreign Minister is coming to Berlin tomorrow, so we're working very hard to have a strong German-Polish relationship, recognizing, and for people like myself, that's very important, what your country has done in order to make possible a Euro-Poland free, which was referred to earlier. One lesson that Germans and Frenchmen, for example, have drawn from the history of the 20th century is that we need a mechanism like the European Union. In a sense, if you boil it down, you could say it's to distribute power and to distribute resources among the nation states of Europe, the existence of which cannot be called into doubt. But we need this mechanism. That's the lesson we draw. So if I may ask, what is your vision of this kind of European Union? What does it do for Poland? What does Poland expect of it? You are not a small country, by the way, in Europe. You are one of the big countries in Europe. There are smaller countries to your east that are members of the European Union, actually. How does that work in terms of distributing power, influence, resources among the 28 of us, or perhaps in the future 27?
That's the sort of challenge I normally have from the journalist. Tell me about the future of the European Union. You got 2 minutes, and or even less. So it's not, of course, this is a very complicated answer to the simple question. First of all, let me say that me personally, I think it was very important this year that we have this joint Polish-German celebration of the 100th anniversary of Polish regaining independence. I think this was a very good signal. The President Steinmeier was to Poland, President Duda went to Berlin, and we can even if the history of 1918 is completely different to Germans and to Poles, we still got show that it is. This gives also the good ground for a conversation and contact between our two countries. I think this was important that to have it joint celebration of that year. To the European Union, you know, it's the most, as the President Duda is saying, we need to have Poles are enthusiastic about the European integration, because we are one of the most pro-EU societies in the European Union, actually. So they are the enthusiastic because the Europe is connected with freedom. Because the European integration was the big engine of liberalization. In the kind of physical sense that the borders are not closed anymore. That I left my country for the first time when I was 17 only. For the first time, I was able to leave my country to get to Vienna at that time. When my uncle was a scholar in the Institute of Human Wissenschaft. So for the Poles of today, this is something you cannot really imagine, that you can be kept in your own country. So European integration was a liberalization mechanism, and that's why we are reacting quite skeptically, so to say, when the European Union is more connected with the you cannot rather than you may, and sometimes so we are still thinking of the European integration as a liberalization mechanism. So we subscribe to the Europe of free. So President Duda keep on saying that we need the 4 freedoms and 4 unities in Europe. The 4 freedoms we all know: the freedom of movement of people, capital, and the rest. The 4 unities is the unity of the market, the unity of the legal system, the unity of a budget. So the major is in the unity of the institutions. Within the unity of budget, of market, budget, institutions, and legal system, we can enjoy the 4 freedoms. And that's the basic architecture, the texture, the basic texture of the European unity. I think every proposal that somehow tries to divide these 4 unities, also, or try to restrict these 4 freedoms, we see it as somehow against the idea of Europe we subscribed into why we were voting in the referendum to join the European Union. So So you can count on us as Poland, as though this member state, one of these big member states, that will always advocate the 4 freedoms and 4 unities, and trying to somehow persuade those who would like to challenge those 4 freedoms and 4 unities.
Well said, and given the political debates, that's nicely done. I hope that translates into a political impetus to move forward, given everything that's happening in Europe right now. My own government
what's happening in Europe right now, according to you? Because that would be interesting. How is your assessment of what's going on now?
So this is your revenge. You can ask me a tough question. Fair enough. I would say that the West in general, by which I mean the transatlantic community, is having its worst moment of self-doubt in ourselves. I used to think since the 1970s, but now I think since the 1930s. And it's taking place in different ways in different countries, with frustration over problems that have built up over years. Very different in Poland than in Western Europe, because the last generation in Poland has been fabulously successful in terms of, well, you tripled your GDP in 1 generation. You're no longer a poor, you're an upper middle income country with poor areas, but you're not a poor country. But there are issues of national identity, issues of wealth disparity, issues of the political responsiveness of institutions. And those problems have manifested themselves in the United States, in the UK, in France, Italy, Germany, Poland, Scandinavia. And in my view, since you asked, and fair enough, right, we need to remember who we are and how we got as far as we did in the past 100 years. In my view, and this is speaking about my own country's foreign policy, when we forgot who we were, that is, we Americans at our best believe that our values and our interests are indivisible. But when we forgot that in the 1920s and the 1930s, the result was catastrophe. For us, worse for you, right, for Poland. We need to remember who we are. And that's not a partisan comment, because administrations from Truman, who was quite a leftist in his domestic policy, to Reagan, who was not a leftist in his domestic policy, subscribed to that same American vision. That's a lesson in the United States. And I think in Europe, we are, none of us is in good shape politically, but we should be, given that I'd still rather have our problems than Russia's. Okay, now that's, we could have a longer discussion, but it's fair that you get to, take a shot at me with a tough question. I mean, that's, and the Trump administration, what Poland has done with the Trump administration, I mentioned this earlier, has been remarkable, because this is the Trump administration that seems sometimes to send mixed signals on NATO, but in fact, since they are considering, and you have pushed them successfully to consider, increasing U.S. military presence, I consider that a singularly good service Poland has done to get us thinking in that way.
For you being the U.S. citizen, it is obvious that you got this your own comments on the domestic policy. I can tell you, for me as the official of Poland, I would say the current U.S. administration or the United States administration. We're not, and for me, I would take it for granted what you said, that it's a remarkable what we achieved with the current U.S. administration. It is a legitimate U.S. administration. We are, we're just making the policy with. So it's the Of course, for the U.S. citizens, this is more about the
Sure.
the leadership and so on. For us, it's just the current U.S. administration. But I ask you about the stage of Europe because I think that's also what the gentleman you ask about. I think the problem of the politics in Europe is also the way that for many Europeans, the European Union is starting, or the European politics of Europe, starting to be rather than question mark than the answer to their needs. That's it makes them somehow they see that part of the problems they are facing each day is coming because of the European Union decisions. Of course, we all know this is the blame game in Europe, always being used, that the national government is saying, okay, this is not me, this is Brussels, and if it's built up on that is more and more question marks than the answers, and that then you start thinking of and you got this popular sentiment. And the second thing I just want to mention is that the problem I see in Europe of today is the fact that if you read the newspapers or see the TV debates among the experts in many of the member states in the European Union, and maybe it includes the United States also, so in the West, so to say, what is the sentiment in the mainstream media and the experts when the elections are coming? The sentiment is fear of the result of the elections, some kind of uneasiness that the elections are coming. Oh my, what will happen? The elections are coming. I mean, in democracy, you cannot live as a political elite being afraid of the elections that are coming and feel uneasy that the elections are coming, because this is the feast of democracy, that the elections are coming. So. And this is this gives us the sort of the signal that because I got this from many of the countries that the titles in the newspapers, kinds of sort of uneasiness because democracy is working. I mean, the elections are coming, So you can think that the society, the people is making the wrong choices, but you have to understand why, even if you think they made it wrong.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Damon, did you have something?
Sure. I know we don't have a tremendous amount of time left, but Dr. Szczerski, I just wanted to. You've had many conversations with our chairman, Jim Jones, about the 3 Cs initiative. You've been a driving force with President Duda on this initiative. The idea of having to promote cross-border connections in Central Europe as a way to increase not just the prosperity of the region, but to build its resilience, particularly if we think about how some of these energy economic issues have been used as a weapon from Russia. But increasingly, we've seen China as a major player in the region, a 16+1 effort underway to work with countries in the region. Can you just offer your perspective a little bit on how you see China's presence in Europe and what that means for Poland, for American interests on the continent as well?
Well, it's first of all, let's say that yes, the 3 Cs initiative is I know if you all are familiar with that, is the idea of the 12 countries between the 3 Cs of the Central Europe as the 3 gates to the outer world, between the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Sea. 12 countries starting from the 3 Baltics, 4 Visegráds, Slovenia and Croatia, Austria, and then Bulgaria and Romania, to build up the infrastructural axis north-south in the eastern part of the central eastern part of Europe, because for different logical reasons, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain, much effort was put into organizing the east-west axis of Europe. So to have a trade, infrastructure of roads, rails open up to somehow overcome this artificial division of the east and west. So that was natural and that was logical. But we neglected this, north-south axis, both in the Western Europe and in the Central Europe. And the new division lines in Europe is more about now organized about the north-south rather than east-west, hopefully no longer coming back. So this also exists in this lack of in the infrastructural connections are also existing in Central Europe, which makes us, as you said, vulnerable to the external pressures. That's surely in the energy market. So we have to somehow overcome it. But also in the way we see economic development of the region, that it should be seen as a cohesive and synergy of the economies of the region rather than competition between them. And I think the way you say it's the we believe that the 3 Cs is the platform, especially by organizing the 3 Cs Fund, which is the development fund of the initiative, as a platform for the United States interest to re-enter in a strategic sense to this part of Europe. It is done within the European Union, which is very important. All 12 member states of the 3 Cs initiative is the member state of the European Union. We gathered 2 strategic partners for the initiative since this year, the United States and Germany, which expressed the strategic interest in supporting the initiative, which is good. And but for the United States, it is the possibility also somehow to build up the economic and strategic asset in this part of the world. If this grand strategy is about somehow reintroducing United States interest in the different parts of the world to compete. This is not for me to discuss who is the. I mean, the competitors was named by the administration, which is Russia and China. So I'm not revealing any secret, and that's. The 3 Cs initiative is especially by organizing the instruments of the initiative, is a good platform to get this realized in the Central Europe, but within, as I said, within the framework of the European Union, which is important.
All right, we have gone over, but Mr. Minister, I want to thank you for everything you're doing. And to note, we've come along, our countries have come a tremendous way in 100 years. I agree with you that 100 years doesn't seem so long ago as it did when I was first studying about Poland, which is quite a sobering thought, actually. We've got now, the good news is we have something to defend, something to be proud of, instead of something which makes us unhappy or uneasy. So this is good. Thank you, Mr. Minister, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks,